25 years ago, mountain guide Ethan Miller vanished without a trace on the rocky trails near Denver, Colorado, leaving behind a devastated family and a community searching for answers. The 35-year-old experienced climber disappeared in June 1999 while leading a group of 6 hikers through what should have been a routine expedition. His sudden absence plunged his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma into unimaginable grief and despair, while the tight-knit mountaineering community struggled to comprehend how one of their most skilled guides could simply vanish into thin air. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen cold cases with respect and evidence. The Denver Police Department initially considered multiple possibilities: a climbing accident, a deliberate disappearance, or even foul play. Despite extensive search operations involving helicopters, rescue dogs, and dozens of volunteers combing every inch of the Rocky Mountain terrain, no trace of Ethan was ever found. The case was eventually archived, leaving his family to fight a lonely battle against time and bureaucratic indifference. They never lost hope that the truth would surface, refusing to accept that the man who knew those mountains better than anyone could have simply disappeared without explanation. The investigation that followed would reveal not just the fate of a missing man, but the dark secrets hidden within a community that prided itself on trust and solidarity. What happened on that June morning in 1999 would haunt everyone involved for decades, until a chance discovery in an abandoned cabin would finally bring the truth to light, a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. In the mountains, they say, the rocks remember everything. And sometimes, after years of silence, they finally speak. The morning of June 15, 1999, began like any other for Ethan Miller. The sun rose over the Colorado Rockies as he prepared his gear with the methodical precision that had made him one of Denver's most trusted mountain guides. His wife Sarah made him coffee in their small kitchen, while 8-year-old Emma sat at the breakfast table, still in her pajamas, asking her father when he would teach her to climb the big rocks like he did. "Soon, sweetheart," Ethan had promised, kissing her forehead. "When you're a little bigger." Those would be the last words Emma would ever hear from her father. The group that assembled at the trailhead that morning consisted of 6 clients from various backgrounds: Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old Denver businessman seeking adventure; Dr. Lisa Chen, a 38-year-old physician from Boulder looking to challenge herself; Jake and Amanda Foster, a young couple from California celebrating their first wedding anniversary; and finally, Tom Bradley and his teenage son, Kevin, hoping to bond through their shared love of the outdoors. According to the statements given to police in the days following Ethan's disappearance, the expedition started without incident. Ethan had chosen a moderate route through El Dorado Canyon, a path he had navigated hundreds of times before. The weather was perfect: clear skies, mild temperatures, and minimal wind. Everything suggested it would be another successful day in the mountains for Colorado's most reliable guide. But somewhere along those familiar trails, something went terribly wrong. By evening, when Ethan failed to return home for Emma's bedtime story, a ritual he had never missed, Sarah knew in her heart that their world had forever changed. The mountain that had given Ethan purpose and passion had somehow claimed him, leaving behind only questions that would torment his family for the next 25 years. The 6 clients who returned that day would carry the weight of that afternoon for the rest of their lives, their accounts of what happened creating more mystery than clarity. Each would tell a slightly different version of events, small discrepancies that would plague the investigation and feed the growing suspicion that someone wasn't telling the complete truth. The first 48 hours after Ethan's disappearance unleashed a desperate search operation across the Colorado Rockies. Sarah Miller paced the floors of the Denver Police Department, clutching Emma's small hand, while officers coordinated with mountain rescue teams. Helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their rotors echoing through the canyons where Ethan had spent countless hours guiding others to safety. Detective Mike Harrison, a 20-year veteran of the force, took charge of the case. He interviewed each of the 6 expedition members multiple times, searching for inconsistencies in their stories. According to their collective account, the group had stopped for lunch around noon near a scenic overlook. Ethan had walked ahead to scout the next portion of the trail and simply never came back. He said he'd be gone for maybe 20 minutes, Marcus Webb told police, his hands trembling as he recalled that afternoon. "We waited and waited. When he didn't return after an hour, We went looking for him. Dr. Lisa Chen corroborated the timeline, adding that the group had called out Ethan's name repeatedly before deciding to return to the trailhead and alert authorities. He was an expert, she emphasized. Something must have happened. A rock slide, maybe, or a medical emergency. Ethan would never just abandon his clients. But Detective Harrison noticed troubling details in their statements. Why had no one heard a cry for help or the sound of falling rocks? How could an experienced guide like Ethan simply vanish on terrain he knew intimately? And why did Jake Foster seem so nervous during questioning, constantly looking to his wife Amanda for confirmation of details? As the days turned into weeks, the search operation gradually scaled down. Volunteer searchers returned to their regular lives, helicopter flights were reduced, and the media moved on to other stories. But for Sarah and Emma Miller, the nightmare was just beginning. Their home, once filled with Ethan's laughter and the stories of his mountain adventures, became a shrine to absence. His climbing boots still by the door, his coffee mug unwashed in the sink, his side of the bed forever empty. The community that had once rallied around the Miller family began to whisper. Some suggested Ethan might have staged his own disappearance, unable to cope with the pressures of family life. Others wondered if he had fallen victim to foul play, though the motive remained unclear. As autumn arrived and the first snow dusted the peaks where Ethan had vanished, Detective Harrison was forced to file the case as a missing person with no leads to follow. In the Miller household, little Emma learned to fall asleep without her father's bedtime stories, while Sarah stared at the mountains every evening, wondering if they would ever give up their secrets. The silence that had swallowed Ethan would persist for 25 long years, broken only by the occasional false lead or reported sighting that led nowhere. But mountains, like time, have a way of revealing buried truths when we least expect them. The years following Ethan Miller's disappearance transformed the Miller family into ghosts of their former selves. Sarah, once vibrant and full of life, became a woman obsessed with finding answers. She spent countless hours poring over police reports, hiking the same trails where her husband vanished, and pestering Detective Harrison with new theories and potential leads. Her grief became a consuming fire that burned through friendships, job opportunities, and any chance of moving forward. Emma Miller grew up in the shadow of a father she could barely remember. At 33 years old, she had spent more of her life without Ethan than with him, yet his absence shaped every milestone. Her high school graduation, college acceptance, first job, and even her own wedding were all marked by the empty chair that should have been occupied by her father. She learned to navigate questions about her family with practiced deflection, telling people her father had died in a climbing accident, rather than explaining the complicated truth of his disappearance. The not knowing is the worst part, Emma would later tell investigators. Death brings closure, but disappearance, it leaves you suspended in this horrible limbo, where hope and despair battle each other every single day. The 6 expedition members from that fateful June day scattered to different corners of the country, each carrying their own burden of what they had witnessed. Marcus Webb sold his Denver business and moved to Florida, claiming he could no longer bear the sight of the mountains. Dr. Lisa Chen continued practicing medicine in Boulder, but never spoke publicly about the expedition again. The Foster couple divorced within 2 years, their marriage unable to survive the trauma and constant police questioning. Perhaps most tellingly, Tom Bradley and his son Kevin both underwent therapy for years following the incident. Kevin, who had been just 17 at the time, suffered from recurring nightmares about the mountains calling his name. His father Tom became a vocal advocate for improved safety protocols in guided expeditions, though he refused all interview requests about the specific details of Ethan's disappearance. Detective Harrison, now retired, kept the Miller file on his desk at home, unable to forget the case that had haunted his career. In 30 years of police work, he reflected, I've never encountered a missing person case with so many witnesses, yet so few answers. 6 people were there when Ethan Miller vanished, and somehow none of them saw what actually happened to him. The Colorado mountaineering community, meanwhile, developed an almost superstitious reverence for the area where Ethan had disappeared. Other guides began avoiding certain sections of the trail, claiming they felt an inexplicable unease in those locations. Some reported hearing distant calls for help carried on the wind, though searches never revealed their source. As the 25th anniversary of Ethan's disappearance approached in 2024, Sarah Miller, now 58 years old with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much sorrow, made one final pilgrimage to the mountains that had claimed her husband. She carried with her a small backpack containing Ethan's favorite climbing rope, the one item of his gear that had never been found. October 15th, 2024, started as an ordinary day for park ranger Jake Morrison as he conducted his routine patrol of the backcountry areas near El Dorado Canyon. 25 years of Colorado winters had been harsh on the abandoned structures scattered throughout the wilderness, and Morrison was documenting which cabins and shelters needed removal or repair before the next season. The cabin he discovered that morning was one he had somehow missed in previous surveys, a weathered structure tucked behind a cluster of aspens, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The roof had partially collapsed, and wildlife had clearly made the interior their home over the years. Morrison almost walked past it entirely, marking it for demolition, when something caught his eye through the broken doorway. Scattered across the rotting floorboards were pieces of climbing equipment, carabiners, rope fragments, and most significantly, a harness with initials carved into the leather, E.M. The discovery sent a chill down Morrison's spine as he realized he might be looking at evidence from Colorado's most famous missing person case. Within hours, the cabin was swarming with investigators, forensic specialists, and FBI agents who had been called in to assist with what was now potentially a homicide investigation. Detective Sarah Reynolds, Harrison's successor on the Miller case, carefully catalogued each piece of equipment, while crime scene photographers documented everything in minute detail. "This changes everything," Reynolds told the assembled team. "We're no longer looking at a missing person who might have fallen into a ravine. This equipment was deliberately placed here, which means someone wanted Ethan Miller's gear hidden from the world." The most disturbing discovery came when investigators moved deeper into the cabin's interior. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in deteriorating plastic, was Ethan's climbing journal, the small notebook he carried on every expedition to record routes, weather conditions, and client observations. The final entry, dated June 15, 1999, contained just 3 words written in Ethan's distinctive handwriting: "They know truth." But it was what forensics found embedded in the cabin's wooden walls that truly shocked investigators. Traces of human blood that initial tests suggested could belong to Ethan Miller. DNA analysis would take weeks to confirm, but the implications were clear. This remote cabin had been the scene of violence, and someone had spent 25 years believing their secret was safely buried in the Colorado wilderness. As news of the discovery spread through Denver, the 6 surviving expedition members found themselves once again under intense scrutiny. Phone calls from reporters went unanswered, and several of them hired attorneys despite not being formally charged with any crime. The conspiracy of silence that had protected them for a quarter-century was finally beginning to crack. Detective Reynolds began the process of re-interviewing each witness, armed now with physical evidence that contradicted their original statements. The story they had maintained for 25 years, that Ethan had simply walked ahead to scout the trail and never returned, was no longer credible. Someone in that group knew exactly what had happened to Ethan Miller, and after 25 years of lies, the truth was finally demanding to be heard. If this case has already grabbed your attention, hit that like button. It helps Ethan Miller's story reach more people. The discovery at the abandoned cabin sent shockwaves through the small community of people who had carried the secret of Ethan Miller's disappearance for 25 years. Within 48 hours of the news breaking, Detective Reynolds received an unexpected phone call that would crack the case wide open. "I need to talk to someone about Ethan Miller," the voice on the other end whispered. It was Amanda Foster, now Amanda Chen after remarrying, calling from her home in Seattle. "I can't carry this anymore, not after what they found in that cabin." The story Amanda revealed during her videotaped confession painted a picture of that June afternoon that was radically different from the version the expedition members had maintained for decades. According to Amanda, the group had not been enjoying a peaceful lunch when Ethan disappeared. Instead, they had been confronting him about something they had discovered, something that threatened to destroy not just Ethan's reputation, but potentially send him to prison. Marcus had found evidence that Ethan was embezzling money from the guide service, Amanda explained, tears streaming down her face as she spoke to investigators via video link. He had been skimming cash from client payments and falsifying safety equipment inspections. Marcus confronted him that day, said he was going to report him to the authorities. The confrontation, according to Amanda, had escalated quickly. Ethan, faced with the end of his career and possible jail time, had become desperate and aggressive. In the struggle that followed, he struck Marcus with a piece of climbing equipment, causing a head injury that began bleeding heavily. "We were all terrified," Amanda continued. "Ethan kept saying we couldn't tell anyone, that his family would be destroyed. But Marcus was hurt, really hurt, and we needed to get him medical attention. That's when everything went wrong." Dr. Lisa Chen, with her medical training, had tried to tend to Marcus's injury, but the bleeding was severe and they were miles from the nearest hospital. In the chaos and panic of the moment, the group made a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They decided to leave Ethan behind and get Marcus to safety. "We left him sitting by that overlook," Amanda sobbed. "He was holding his head in his hands, crying. He kept saying he was sorry, that he never meant for any of this to happen. We promised we'd send help back for him, but by the time the rescue team searched that area, he was gone." The revelation explained why Ethan's equipment had been found in the cabin. He had apparently made his way to the remote shelter, possibly injured himself, and died there alone. But it didn't explain who had moved his body, or why his gear had been carefully hidden beneath the floorboards. As Detective Reynolds continued her investigation, she uncovered financial records that supported Amanda's claims. Ethan Miller had indeed been embezzling money from Rocky Mountain Guide Services, skimming thousands of dollars over several months to pay for gambling debts that Sarah never knew he had accumulated. The discovery shattered Sarah Miller's memories of her husband, replacing the image of a loving father and dedicated professional with that of a desperate man who had risked everything on bad bets and worse choices. Yet even in her devastation, she felt a twisted sense of relief. After 25 years of wondering, she finally knew why her husband had never come home. But questions remained. Who had moved Ethan's body? Who had hidden his equipment? And why had the 6 expedition members chosen to lie about the confrontation rather than tell the truth about what had driven Ethan to his desperate final act? The answers to these questions would come from an unexpected source and would reveal that the tragedy of June 15, 1999, was even darker than anyone had imagined. Amanda Foster's confession had opened a floodgate, but Detective Reynolds knew there were still crucial pieces missing from the puzzle. If the group had simply left Ethan at the overlook as Amanda claimed, who had moved his body to the remote cabin? And why had someone taken such elaborate care to hide his equipment beneath the floorboards? The answer came from the most unexpected source: Kevin Bradley, now 42 years old and working as a social worker in Phoenix. The teenage boy who had been on the expedition with his father Tom had carried the heaviest burden of all, and Amanda's public confession had finally given him the courage to speak. "My dad and I went back," Kevin revealed during his own videotape statement, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days after the police called off the search for that area, Dad said we needed to make sure Ethan was really gone, that we hadn't abandoned someone who might still be alive. What Tom and Kevin Bradley discovered when they returned to the mountains would haunt them both for the next 25 years. They found Ethan Miller's body inside the abandoned cabin, where he had apparently crawled after suffering what appeared to be a severe head injury, possibly from the confrontation with Marcus Webb, or from a fall while trying to navigate the rocky terrain alone and disoriented. He was sitting against the wall," Kevin continued, tears now flowing freely. There was dried blood on his face, and his climbing journal was open beside him. Dad said Ethan must have made it to the cabin but died from his injuries before anyone could find him. Tom Bradley, faced with the discovery of Ethan's body, made a decision that would corrupt his soul for decades. Rather than report the find to authorities, he chose to protect the group that had left Ethan behind. Working together, father and son moved Ethan's remains to a deeper part of the wilderness and carefully concealed his equipment in the cabin. "Dad kept saying we were protecting everyone," Kevin explained, "that if we reported finding Ethan's body, the police would investigate what really happened that day. Marcus could be charged with assault, and all of us could face charges for abandoning someone who needed help. Dad convinced me we were doing the right thing, that Ethan's family would suffer more if they knew the truth." The psychological toll of this secret had devastated both father and son. Tom Bradley developed severe depression and began drinking heavily, while Kevin struggled with anxiety and guilt throughout his teenage years and into adulthood. The therapy sessions Tom had sought for both of them had been attempts to cope with their shared trauma, not recovery from witnessing Ethan's disappearance. Detective Reynolds's investigation revealed that Tom Bradley had been making anonymous donations to Sarah Miller for years, guilt money intended to ease his conscience. Bank records showed payments totaling over $50,000 sent to various charities in Ethan's name, as well as contributions to Emma's college fund that Sarah had never known the source of. When confronted with Kevin's confession, Tom Bradley, now 68 and suffering from early-stage dementia, could barely remember the details of that terrible decision. "I thought I was protecting my son," he told investigators from his assisted living facility. "I never wanted Kevin to grow up knowing he'd been part of letting a man die alone in the mountains." The revelation that Ethan Miller had survived the initial confrontation only to die alone and afraid in an abandoned cabin added a new layer of tragedy to an already devastating case. Sarah Miller, who had spent 25 years hoping her husband might somehow still be alive, now faced the horrific reality that he had suffered greatly in his final hours, calling out for help that would never come. With Kevin Bradley's confession, the full scope of the conspiracy that had hidden Ethan Miller's fate for 25 years finally came to light. Detective Reynolds now had statements from 2 of the 6 expedition members, but she was determined to hear from the others who had carried this burden in silence for so long. Marcus Webb, the Denver businessman whose confrontation with Ethan had triggered the fatal chain of events, had suffered his own form of justice over the decades. The head injury he sustained during the altercation had left him with chronic migraines and memory problems that forced him to sell his successful business and move to Florida. His wife had divorced him after years of dealing with his mood swings and drinking, and his relationship with his adult children remained strained. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Webb told investigators when they tracked him down at his modest apartment in Tampa. "I just wanted Ethan to return the money he'd stolen and get help for his gambling problem. When he attacked me, everything happened so fast. I was bleeding, scared, and angry. I made the worst decision of my life when I agreed to leave him there." Dr. Lisa Chen, whose medical training could have potentially saved Ethan's life, had perhaps suffered the most professional consequences. Though she never faced formal charges, the guilt of abandoning a patient in need had eaten away at her dedication to medicine. She had gradually reduced her practice over the years, eventually retiring early and dedicating herself to volunteer work at free clinics, a form of penance she hoped might somehow balance the scales of her conscience. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about what might have happened if I had insisted we stay with him," Dr. Chen revealed during her emotional interview. "I took an oath to do no harm, and I violated that oath in the worst possible way. I left an injured man alone in the wilderness to die." Jake Foster, who had divorced Amanda within 2 years of the expedition, had struggled with substance abuse and depression throughout his adult life. The secret he carried had poisoned every relationship he attempted, and he had never been able to form lasting connections with others while harboring such a devastating lie. The conspiracy of silence that had protected the group for 25 years had ultimately destroyed them all in different ways. Each had paid a price for their decision to abandon Ethan Miller, and none had found peace in the decades that followed. Perhaps most tragically, the investigation revealed that if the group had simply told the truth from the beginning, they likely would have faced minimal legal consequences. The confrontation with Ethan had been justified given his embezzlement, and leaving him after he became violent could have been considered self-defense. Their decision to lie to police and cover up the circumstances had transformed a tragic accident into a criminal conspiracy. Sarah Miller, now armed with the complete truth about her husband's final day, faced the complex task of reconciling her grief with anger at both Ethan's deception and the expedition members' cowardice. "I spent 25 years mourning a man I thought I knew," she reflected. "Learning about his gambling and embezzlement was devastating, but discovering that 6 people chose to let him die alone rather than face the consequences of their actions, that's a betrayal I'm not sure I can ever forgive." Emma Miller, meanwhile, struggled with the knowledge that her father's death could have been prevented if any of the expedition members had shown the courage to tell the truth or return to help him. The idealized image of her father that had sustained her through childhood was forever shattered, replaced by the complex reality of a flawed man who had made terrible choices but didn't deserve to die alone and forgotten in the wilderness. On March 15, 2025, exactly 25 years and 9 months after Ethan Miller disappeared into the Colorado wilderness, his remains were finally laid to rest in Denver's Crown Hill Cemetery. Sarah and Emma Miller stood beside the grave as a small gathering of family and friends paid their respects to a man whose true story had taken nearly 3 decades to emerge. The legal consequences for the expedition members were ultimately limited by the passage of time and the complex circumstances surrounding Ethan's death. Kevin Bradley received immunity in exchange for his testimony, while his father Tom was deemed incompetent to stand trial due to his dementia. Amanda Foster and Dr. Lisa Chen were charged with filing false police reports and received probation and community service. Marcus Webb and Jake Foster faced more serious charges of reckless endangerment and conspiracy, but plea deals resulted in suspended sentences and significant financial restitution to the Miller family. The prosecutor acknowledged that while their actions had been morally reprehensible, proving that their decision to leave Ethan had directly caused his death would be difficult after so many years. Justice in this case isn't about punishment, District Attorney Rebecca Martinez explained at a press conference. It's about truth, accountability, and finally giving the Miller family the answers they deserved 25 years ago. The revelation of Ethan's embezzlement had also led to a broader investigation of Rocky Mountain Guide Services, revealing systematic safety violations and financial irregularities that had put countless clients at risk over the years. The company was ultimately forced to close, and new regulations were implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future. Detective Reynolds, reflecting on the case that had consumed months of her life, noted the broader implications of the Miller investigation. This case demonstrates how a web of lies, even those told with good intentions, can cause more damage than the truth ever would have. 6 people thought they were protecting themselves and each other, but they ended up destroying their own lives and prolonging the agony of a grieving family. Sarah Miller, now 59, and finally possessing the complete truth about her husband's fate, began the difficult process of healing. She established the Ethan Miller Foundation, dedicated to improving safety protocols for guided wilderness expeditions and providing support for families of missing persons. The Foundation's motto, taken from Ethan's final journal entry, was simply, "Truth matters." Emma Miller, meanwhile, found an unexpected sense of closure in finally understanding her father's story, complicated as it was. "For 25 years I lived with questions," she reflected. "Learning that my father wasn't perfect, that he made serious mistakes, was painful but ultimately liberating. I can finally mourn the real person he was, not the idealized memory I'd created." The abandoned cabin where Ethan's equipment was discovered has been preserved as part of the investigation record, but it serves as an unofficial memorial to all those who have been lost in Colorado's wilderness. Park rangers report that visitors sometimes leave flowers or climbing gear near the site, honoring not just Ethan Miller, but all the missing who have never been found. In the end, the Ethan Miller case became more than just a true crime story. It became a cautionary tale about the corrosive power of secrets and the importance of facing difficult truths. The mountains of Colorado, which had kept Ethan's secret for 25 years, finally yielded their silence to reveal a story of human frailty, poor choices, and the devastating consequences of choosing fear over honesty. The 6 people who witnessed Ethan Miller's last day spent a quarter-century believing their silence protected them, only to discover that the truth, however painful, would have set them free decades earlier. As Sarah Miller stood beside her husband's grave on that March morning, she whispered the words that had taken 25 years to become reality. "Finally, you can rest in peace." Subscribe to our channel to explore more cold cases and disturbing mysteries across America. Thank you for following Ethan Miller's story. See you in the next video. 5 years after the truth was finally revealed, the morning mist clings to the peaks of the Colorado Rockies as Sarah Miller, now 64, makes her annual pilgrimage to the Overlook where her husband Ethan was last seen alive 30 years ago. Her hair is completely silver now, and the lines around her eyes speak of decades spent searching for answers that came too late. But there's something different about her today, a sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. "I come here every June 15th, she explains to the documentary camera, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not to mourn anymore, but to remember. To honor both the man I thought I married and the flawed human being he actually was." The Ethan Miller Foundation, which Sarah established following the resolution of her husband's case, has become one of Colorado's most respected organizations dedicated to wilderness safety and missing persons advocacy. Operating from a modest office in downtown Denver, the foundation has helped implement new regulations requiring GPS tracking devices for all guided expeditions, mandatory emergency communication protocols, and comprehensive background checks for wilderness guides. Ethan's story taught us that secrets in the wilderness can be deadly, explains Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Foundation's current director and a former search and rescue coordinator. We've helped locate over 200 missing persons in the past 5 years, and in every case, the key has been immediate transparency and coordination between all parties involved. The Foundation's most significant achievement has been the creation of the Truth First Protocol, a legal framework that provides limited immunity for expedition members who report accidents or emergencies immediately, even when negligence or poor judgment may have been involved. The protocol recognizes that fear of legal consequences often prevents people from seeking help when lives are at stake. If this protocol had existed in 1999, reflects District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, who worked closely with the Foundation on the legislation, Ethan Miller might be alive today. Sometimes the greatest justice we can achieve is preventing the same tragedy from happening to others. Emma Miller, now 38 and a successful wilderness photographer, has found her own way to honor her father's complex legacy. Her award-winning photo series, Hidden Truths: The Secret Lives of Mountains, has been displayed in galleries across the country, each image accompanied by stories of missing persons whose cases remain unsolved. My father taught me to love the mountains before I could even walk, Emma reflects while reviewing contact sheets in her Denver studio. Learning the truth about his death was devastating, but it also freed me to see the wilderness for what it really is: beautiful and dangerous, healing and destructive, all at the same time. The mountains don't judge us for our flaws, they simply reflect back our own humanity. Emma's relationship with her mother has grown stronger in the years since the case was resolved. The shared trauma of learning Ethan's true story, his gambling addiction, the embezzlement, the confrontation that led to his death, created a bond between them that transcends their previous grief-stricken dynamic. For 25 years we were frozen in time, Sarah explains, stuck in June of 1999, unable to move forward because we didn't know what we were moving forward from. Now we know the whole truth, and while it's painful, it's also liberating. We can finally grieve properly and then heal. The 6 expedition members who carried the secret of Ethan's death for a quarter century have each found their own paths to redemption, though the journey has been far from easy. Amanda Foster, whose confession broke the case open, has become an advocate for restorative justice programs. She speaks regularly at conferences about the psychological toll of carrying traumatic secrets and the healing power of truth-telling. I lived with that lie for 25 years, Amanda explains during a recent interview. It poisoned every relationship I had, every decision I made. When I finally told the truth, I expected to feel worse. But instead, for the first time in decades, I could breathe freely. Dr. Lisa Chen has dedicated her retirement to establishing free medical clinics in remote areas of Colorado, training wilderness first aid instructors, and developing protocols for medical emergencies in backcountry settings. Her work has been recognized by the American Medical Association as groundbreaking in the field of wilderness medicine. I can never undo the choice I made in 1999, Dr. Chen admits. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to ensure that no one else dies alone in the wilderness because people were too afraid to do the right thing. Marcus Webb, whose confrontation with Ethan triggered the tragic chain of events, has struggled more than the others with forgiveness, both from others and from himself. He established a scholarship fund for children of gambling addicts and works with organizations that help people overcome addiction. His own journey to sobriety began only after the truth about Ethan's case was revealed. I blamed Ethan for years, Webb explains from his small apartment in Tampa. I told myself he was the villain in this story because he stole money and attacked me, but the truth is we were all victims of circumstances that spiraled out of control. Ethan was sick, addiction is a disease, and instead of helping him, I contributed to his death. Kevin Bradley, who carried the heaviest burden as a teenager forced to help conceal a death, has found healing through his work as a trauma counselor specializing in adolescent therapy. His experience has given him unique insight into how secrets and guilt can damage young minds. My father thought he was protecting me by making me complicit in covering up Ethan's death, Kevin reflects, But protecting someone from consequences isn't the same as protecting them from harm. I spent decades in therapy learning to separate my father's choices from my own identity. Tom Bradley passed away in 2027, 2 years after the case was resolved. His dementia had progressed to the point where he rarely remembered the events of June 1999, but Kevin reports that in his lucid moments, his father expressed relief that the truth had finally come out. In the end, Dad was grateful that Kevin had the courage to tell the truth that he never could, says Tom's widow, Patricia. He carried that guilt for 25 years, and it literally ate him alive. The drinking, the depression, the isolation, it all stemmed from that one terrible decision in the mountains. The abandoned cabin where Ethan's equipment was discovered has been preserved by the National Park Service as an unofficial memorial, though it's not marked or publicized. Rangers report that visitors still occasionally leave flowers, climbing gear, or personal notes near the site. Some leave messages for loved ones they've lost, others leave apologies for secrets they've carried. Detective Mike Harrison, the original investigator on the case, passed away in 2026 at the age of 78. His replacement, Detective Sarah Reynolds, keeps Harrison's original case file in a place of honor in her office, a reminder of the importance of never giving up on finding the truth. Mike always said that the dead deserve justice, but the living deserve truth, Reynolds reflects. The Ethan Miller case proved that sometimes those two things aren't the same. We couldn't give Ethan justice. He was already gone. But we could give his family the truth they needed to heal. The case has had broader implications for law enforcement's approach to missing persons investigations. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation now requires that all expedition members be interviewed separately within 24 hours of reporting a missing guide or client, and any discrepancies in their accounts trigger immediate follow-up investigations. The Miller case taught us that group dynamics can corrupt witness accounts, explains CBI Director Robert Martinez. When people have time to coordinate their stories, the truth becomes much harder to uncover. Immediate, separate interviews are now standard protocol. The Rocky Mountain Guide Services, the company that employed Ethan, was permanently shut down following the investigation. Its former owner, Robert Hayes, faced federal charges for safety violations and financial fraud unrelated to Ethan's embezzlement. The building that once housed the company now hosts the regional headquarters of the Colorado Search and Rescue Association. Ethan's case exposed systemic problems in how we regulate wilderness guide services, explains Association Director Maria Santos. We've implemented new oversight mechanisms, financial auditing requirements, and mandatory psychological evaluations for guides showing signs of stress or addiction. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome of the case has been its impact on gambling addiction awareness in Colorado. Ethan's story has become a cautionary tale used by addiction counselors to illustrate how untreated gambling problems can escalate into criminal behavior and tragedy. Ethan Miller started with small bets, probably just trying to add some excitement to his life, explains Dr. Robert Kim, director of the Colorado Problem Gambling Program. But addiction is progressive. What begins as harmless entertainment can destroy families, careers, and ultimately lives. Ethan's story shows how addiction isolates people and makes them capable of choices they never would have considered when healthy. The gambling debts that drove Ethan to embezzlement were eventually traced to both online poker sites and regular visits to Black Hawk casinos. Records showed that in the months before his death, he had been losing between $2,000 and $5,000 per week, money he could only replace by skimming from client payments and falsifying equipment purchase records. Sarah never knew about the gambling because Ethan was very good at hiding it, explains addiction specialist Dr. Jennifer Taylor. That's typical of gambling addiction. The shame and secrecy are part of the disease. If Sarah had known, she might have been able to get him help before it escalated to embezzlement and that fatal confrontation. Today, 30 years after Ethan Miller vanished into the Colorado wilderness, his story serves as more than just a cautionary tale about the dangers of keeping secrets. It has become a testament to the power of truth, the possibility of redemption, and the importance of facing our darkest moments with honesty and courage. Sarah Miller still lives in the same Denver home she shared with Ethan, though she's removed most of his climbing equipment and photographs from the walls. In their place hang pictures of Emma's wedding, grandchildren she never thought she'd live to see, and awards from the foundation that bears Ethan's name. People ask me if I hate the 6 people who left my husband to die, Sarah reflects as the sun sets behind the mountains that claimed Ethan's life. The answer is complicated. I'm angry at their cowardice, devastated by their lies, and heartbroken by the years we lost to their silence. But I also understand that they were scared, young and faced with an impossible situation. Hate won't bring Ethan back, and it won't heal the wounds his death created. What I've learned is that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living with lies. Ethan made terrible choices in the last months of his life, but he didn't deserve to die alone and forgotten. The 6 people who witnessed his final day made their own terrible choices, but they didn't deserve to carry that guilt for 25 years either. In the end, this story isn't about heroes and villains. It's about human beings making flawed decisions under extreme stress, and the long shadow those decisions cast over multiple lives. The mountains where Ethan died are still there, still beautiful, still dangerous. They don't care about our human dramas or moral failures. They simply exist, waiting for the next group of people to test themselves against the wilderness. The lesson of Ethan's story isn't that the mountains are evil or that people are inherently bad. It's that secrets are poison, truth is medicine, and even the deepest wounds can eventually heal if we have the courage to face them honestly. As Sarah speaks these final words, the camera pulls back to show her silhouette against the vast expanse of the Rocky Mountains, a solitary figure who has finally found peace after 3 decades of searching for answers. The mountains stretch endlessly into the distance, their peaks touched with the golden light of sunset, holding countless secrets, but revealing them only to those brave enough to seek the truth. The case of Ethan Miller reminds us that in the wilderness, as in life, survival often depends not on avoiding difficult truths, but on facing them with courage, honesty, and the hope that even our darkest secrets can eventually be brought into the light. In memory of all those lost in the wilderness, and in honor of those who never stop searching for the truth, the Ethan Miller Foundation continues to help families of missing persons and improve wilderness safety protocols. If you or someone you know struggles with gambling addiction, help is available through the National Problem Gambling Helpline.